Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Ralph Reed, who is the founder and chair of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Welcome to Washington Journal.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Good to be with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. And you're in the Washington, D.C. area this week for your coalition's annual Road to Majority conference. Can you talk a little bit about your group, the Faith and Freedom Coalition, as well as your Road to Majority conference?
Well, I founded Faith and Freedom in 2009 in the aftermath of the first Obama campaign, when the center-right got so badly out-hustled on the ground by the Obama and liberal forces. They did a much better job of identifying their vote, mobilizing it, and turning it out. I had been involved in the Bush campaigns in 2000 and 2004. I had headed the Christian Coalition in the 90s. So I had some familiarity and background in voter registration, mobilization, and turnout. And I felt it was really important that the faith community was engaged, that Christians had a voice in their government. And since that founding, Faith and Freedom Coalition has now grown to over 3 million members and supporters and activists in all 50 states. We have full-time lobbyists in probably 16 state capitals. We have a fully staffed legislative and policy office in Washington, D.C. And in 2024, we knocked on 9,734,949 doors in the battleground states. And according to exit polls, as well as Pew Research data, we saw the largest turnout of conservative, evangelical, and other conservative Christians in the modern political era. They voted about 82 to 83% for Donald Trump, and they provided between 45 and 48%, depending upon how you count it, of his entire vote. So it's a really big deal, and this weekend is our annual policy conference. We're at the Washington Hilton, and this thing has been packed out for 2 days with an unbelievable lineup of speakers.
Who are some of your speakers, and will the president be joining you?
Well, the president has been here 9 times before, and he is always welcome here. He hasn't arrived yet, but with Donald Trump, you never know. We've been in touch with the White House, and again, he's always welcome. And we'd love to have him, but honestly, the most important thing and the reason why we did what we did in 2024 was so he could be sitting behind the Resolute desk, making the decisions he's making. We've also had Speaker Mike Johnson, who keynoted our gala last night, Israeli ambassador to the United States, Yekil Leiter, which we thought was very timely given the situation in the Middle East and the recent military strikes against Iran's nuclear sites. We've had everybody from Senator Lindsey Graham, Rick Scott. We've had members of the cabinet, including EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent yesterday morning, Scott Turner, Secretary of HUD. I don't want to leave anybody out, but about half the cabinet. And many senators, governors, congressmen, Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia yesterday. Winsome Sears, by the way, the gubernatorial nominee in Virginia, will be here this morning. And in addition to that, for those of your viewers who are people of faith, a lot of faith leaders and religious leaders who are here. Mm-hmm. Paula White, who heads the faith office of the White House, Eric Metaxas, best-selling author, and Robert Jeffress, who is the pastor of First Baptist in Dallas. So it's an interesting mix of faith and policy.
Quite the lineup. Broadening out a little bit beyond the conference, what are some of the key important political themes motivating social conservatives this cycle?
Well, I think that at the moment, we're really focused not exclusively, but primarily on 2 things. Number one, the conservative priorities, not just for the faith community, but for the center-right generally, that are in the Trump tax cut bill, the so-called big beautiful bill. And for us, those boil down to 3 or 4 big things. One is expansion of the child tax credit. We think the child tax credit is sound fiscal and tax policy, but it's also social policy. It's allowing families with children to keep more of what they earn, because we believe the most successful Department of Health, Education, and Welfare ever conceived is not in a government building in Washington, D.C. It's families and homes and marriages and children. That's the first schoolhouse. It's the first workplace. It's where children are nurtured and socialized. So we want to strengthen that family unit. The bill, the big beautiful bill, expands the child tax credit from the current $2,000 to $2,500. The Senate bill indexes it for inflation. Secondly, is the ending of forced taxpayer funding of abortion, including subsidies, taxpayer subsidies, to Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider in the Western world that performs about 400,000 abortions a year. And I know this is a controversial issue, and I know not everybody agrees, but whether you're pro-life or you're pro-choice, there is a consensus in our country, and polling shows it somewhere between 60 to 80%, depending upon the poll, who do not believe that taxpayers should be forced to pay for what many believe is the taking of an innocent human life in its mother's womb. And then the third priority in the bill is the school choice provisions. There's a provision that allocates about $5 billion for tax credits for contributions by taxpayers to elementary and secondary education scholarships, so that children who are trapped in schools where they can't learn or they're not safe can attend a school of their parents' choice. So there are some big things in this bill that we want.
I just want to pause you briefly on the school choice effort. I'm seeing a story here in the AP just from yesterday afternoon that a Republican plan to expand private school vouchers nationwide was dealt a major setback Friday when the Senate parliamentarian said the proposal would run afoul of procedural rules. The years in the making plan would have created a federal tax credit supporting scholarships to help families send their children to private schools or other options beyond their local public schools. But in an overnight announcement, the Senate parliamentarian advised against including the proposal in President Donald Trump's tax cut and spending bill. Your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, the Senate parliamentarian has sadly dealt a number of blows to provisions in this bill, and this is just one of them. But this is not the end of the line. There's a process in the Senate where you can appeal to the chair. We're going to urge that that be done. And no matter what happens in the Senate, you have to remember there's going to be 2 versions of this bill. One House, one Senate. They're going to have to go to a conference committee after the Senate acts. They're going to have to meld those 2 bills into one final product. And then we're going to get to another bite of the apple. And, you know, I'm not an expert on Senate parliamentary procedure, but also this is not my first rodeo. You know, I've been doing this for decades, and we've been dealt these kind of blows before. There's often a way for a workaround. There's a way to reformulate or rewrite the legislative language. But I can tell you this, whether it is in this bill or in a subsequent bill, we're going to keep fighting for the rights of every child in every school in America, whether they're black, brown, yellow, or white, whether they're rich or poor, to be able to attend a school where they can learn and where they're safe and where they can be future successful workers, business owners, and citizens. Right now, we have a 2-tier educational system, and the well-to-do and the wealthy get to go to the good schools, and the poorer children and the more minority children are trapped in schools where they don't know how to read, they don't know how to write at grade level, and it's abysmal. And this is not just an educational issue. This is a moral issue, and it is a issue of right and wrong, and frankly, it is the civil rights issue of our time. And if you look at the history of our country, the segregationists used to stand in the schoolhouse door and tell minority school children they couldn't get in. Now you have today's liberal leaders and the teachers' unions and the Democrats standing in the schoolhouse door and telling those minority children they can't leave. It's wrong, it's immoral, and we are not going to rest until this is resolved and fixed, and every child can go to a quality school.
We're going to be taking your calls for Ralph Reed from the Faith and Freedom Coalition. And our phone lines one more time: for Republicans, 202-748-8001, for Democrats, 202-748-8000, and for Independents, 202-748-8002. Mr. Reed, you mentioned Planned Parenthood earlier, and I want to get your thoughts on the Supreme Court 6-3 ruling against Planned Parenthood, saying that medical patients do not have the right to sue to obtain non-abortion health care from the organization's medical providers. Obviously, using federal funds for abortions is already banned. The decision allows South Carolina to cut off Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood. What are your thoughts on that decision, and what happens moving forward?
Well, obviously, we have supported defunding not just Planned Parenthood, but other abortion providers under Medicaid programs. And frankly, this has been a long-standing bipartisan consensus in our country that goes all the way back to the Carter administration and the passage of the Hyde Amendment, which was sponsored by the late Congressman Henry Hyde of Illinois. And it said that taxpayers would not be forced to pay for abortion under the Medicaid program for elective abortions. And that has been the policy throughout the history almost since Roe v. Wade. So this is an issue that is a little different. The challenge is that if Planned Parenthood is receiving taxpayer funds for other services, they have ways of cross-subsidizing, and a lot of times those funds, if they're not entirely fungible, they're certainly partially fungible. And I think it's also, frankly, an issue of just sound public policy and sound Medicaid policy. If what you're trying to do is to provide people with prenatal care and other essential services, you don't really want to be funneling funds into an organization whose primary purpose is to take the life of an innocent child in its mother's womb. And so that's the reason for the policy. There were in the Bush administration, I mean Bush 43, George W. Bush, there were community health centers that were set up to provide a full spectrum of healthcare services to Medicaid recipients and others of a lower socioeconomic status who needed access to quality healthcare, so that there were those healthcare clinics. And I think it's something that the states have a right to do. I applaud the Supreme Court decision. And as I said, we're going to fight to make sure that this happens at the federal level, which means it will apply to all 50 states.
I want to read you a portion of the dissent that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote in this case on that Planned Parenthood ruling. She said, "Today's decision is likely to result in tangible harm to real people. At a minimum, it will deprive Medicaid recipients in South Carolina of their only meaningful way of enforcing a right that Congress has expressly granted to them. And more concretely, it will strip those South Carolinians and countless other Medicaid recipients around the country of a deeply personal freedom, the ability to decide who treats us at our most vulnerable. The court today disregards Congress's express desire to prevent that very outcome." Your response, Mr. Reed?
Well, obviously, I disagree with the dissent, and I very strongly agree with the majority opinion, because I think that taxpayers have rights too, and you're trying to balance those two rights. So we believe people have a right to quality health care. It's a matter of prudential judgment as to whether or not that's provided by charities, whether it's provided by faith organizations, such as the tradition of faith-based hospitals like Catholic hospitals and Methodist and Baptist hospitals, or whether it's provided by the government. This idea that the choice of first resort to care for the poor and the marginalized is always the government is just not true. But once you're involving taxpayer funds, I believe taxpayers have a right to make prudential judgments about how those funds are best used in deploying them for purposes of caring for those who need help. And I think, again, as I said, it has been a bipartisan consensus under every president since 1978 that we do not use taxpayer funds under the Medicaid program to pay for elective abortions. That was the policy under Clinton, under Obama, and even though Biden opposed it, every Democratic candidate for president, by the way, supported that until Hillary Clinton in 2016. So it's only been very recently that the Democrats have advocated for Medicaid paying for abortion. And there's one simple reason why. It's because they're pro-abortion. They want more abortions. And the way to do that is to have the taxpayers subsidize it. In fact, the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is a research arm of Planned Parenthood, has estimated that if there was taxpayer-funded abortion the way the Democrats in the Senate want, the way Kamala Harris and Joe Biden advocated in the last presidential election, it would lead to 200 to 300,000 additional abortions every year in America. And wherever you stand on this issue, and again, I know it's a divisive issue. It's a highly emotional issue. I understand that. But wherever you stand on this issue, and I'm strongly pro-life, you should be trying to have policies that will lead to fewer abortions, not more abortions. That's not sound policy.
Let's go to some questions from our callers. Kristen is in Warren, Ohio on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Kristen.
Hi. I would kind of like to go back to what he was saying about the voucher system and how it's the majority reason for doing so is to help all the low-income kids. I'm a little miffed about how much we keep touting that when the reality is in Ohio, only 10% of the kids who are receiving vouchers are literally from that sector of low income and wanting to have a better leg up of getting into an environment that is not what a lot of it happens in public schools. 10%. The rest of the people who are receiving those vouchers are people who have had children never once step into a public setting. They've already been paying that. They can afford it. And what happens, one of two ways. That 10% of low income that comes in there, they come in and do manage to get in a better environment, and that's, of course, why their parents sent them there. They're not dealing with all the fights and the riffraff and the things that happen sometimes in public schools because public schools don't have the luxury of kicking out kids when they do things that break the rules. And I can tell you, I sent my kids to both.
So, Kristen, I want to give our guest a chance to respond to some of the points that you've raised.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that Ohio program, but I can tell you that, so I can't respond to that directly, other than to take the point. I mean, I can't dispute it, but I can tell you that in the most long-standing, well-developed, and robust educational choice programs, such as in the state of Florida, which began under then Governor Jeb Bush, and then was subsequently expanded by every subsequent governor. It's been a very long process. You know, Rick Scott, and then later Ron DeSantis. It's been under Governor Ron DeSantis that it's become universal school choice. And yes, in many of these states, everybody is allowed to take advantage of that scholarship program, not just the lower income individuals. That's a matter left up to those individual states. But in case I didn't make it clear, I believe this is the right of every parent and every child, regardless of income, regardless of ethnic background, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of where they are geographically, whether they're in a rural area, suburban, or urban. We believe this is the right of a parent. And again, you know, this is a policy dispute. The Democrats and the left and the teachers unions, they believe that the only option that should be subsidized by public funds and should be encouraged by public funds is a public school. Now, look, just to be clear, I am a product of public schools. I attended public schools my entire life until I went to graduate school. So from first grade all the way through my college degree. So I believe in public education, but I also believe that the best way to have quality public education is to have competition, and more importantly, to give families, parents, and children the right to attend the school of their choice. And I think, when you're talking about a 21st century system, and I'm familiar in a broad way about the history of public education in the country. I believe in it. I think we need to have a strong public education system. I've had family members who are teachers, and I want to applaud all the public school teachers that are out there on the front lines every day. But we're not in the early 19th century. This is not the era of Horace Mann. The problem we confront as a society in the age of the internet and artificial intelligence and technology and the 21st century is not the ability of, taking people who are illiterate and providing them with a basic subsistence education so they can read and write. We have to prepare these people to be the workers, the entrepreneurs, and the citizens of the 21st century. And the way to do that is to have a free market system where there's competition, where there's innovation, where there's multiple choices, where consumers and parents and children get to decide, not bureaucrats. And that's the best system by far. And the irony of this, Kimberly...
Ralph, I do want to get to a few more callers, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Let's hear from John in South Dakota on our line for Democrats. Good morning, John.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to call. The biggest problem that we have, and the reason, this bill is very bad, is because, you have nitrous oxide, which is 315 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than CO2 is. And it's exponentially releasing from the polar regions now as the ice melts. And then you also have methane.
John, what's your question specifically for Mr. Reed?
Because of the warming planet, and all the information that this bill, it's getting rid of, like, information from NOAA, from NASA. It's going after any renewable energy that wants to get us off fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry uses men like this to convince religious people who are good people. It convinces them that this man is going to try to save their children, when in fact he's going to murder them by making this planet uninhabitable. So please, everybody,
John, I just want to make sure that we're clear on your point. You're arguing that the phase out of the clean energy tax credits in the Big Beautiful Bill Act is something that's particularly damaging?
Yes, actually, manslaughter is when you accidentally kill children and stuff. But this man is doing it unintentionally.
He's not killing anyone, but let's hear from Ralph Reed, maybe on your position on how this bill treats clean energy tax credits as well as maybe climate change more broadly.
Yeah, we know this is a big debate that's underway in the Senate right now. The House has largely eliminated those Green New Deal provisions that were previously passed under some of Joe Biden's spending blowouts, of which he had 3 different bills. He had an infrastructure bill. He had the American Renewal Act that created these massive subsidies for alternative energy, whether it's wind or solar or whatever it was. And here's the basic problem. There's 2 issues. The first is that even if you buy in to the argument of the climate change lobby, the policies that they advocated, the subsidies and the for clean energy, that alternative energy, and the things that they tried to do to discourage the use of fossil fuel, they wouldn't have changed the global climate by, even a half a degree Celsius over the next 50 years. So even if you believe all of their apocalyptic warnings about the warming of the climate, their own policies and their own projections were that it wasn't going to make a significant difference. Even if you take something like their subsidies for electric vehicles, how do you think we power electricity? The electricity grid is largely natural gas, oil, coal. A very small percentage of it is alternative energy. So you would think, oh, we're all going to drive electric vehicles. And by the way, I'm not hostile to electric vehicles. I own one. But I'm not under any delusion that by powering my car through the electric grid, rather than putting gasoline in it, that I'm somehow or another saving the planet. Most of the electricity is generated by fossil fuel because solar only works when the sun's out, wind only works when the wind is blowing, and that's not all the time. You need a reliable electricity grid. So no matter what our policy is, the bulk of the electricity grid is going to be powered by fossil fuel because it's more reliable. Last point. If you try to do these things through government bureaucracy and through command and control out of Washington, D.C., rather than allow the marketplace to make these choices, you're going to have a disaster on your hands. And I don't have handy this morning the actual totals of the amounts for these individual programs, but I can tell you this, billions were in the Biden spending blowouts for setting up these car chargers, these EV chargers, electric vehicle chargers all over the country. We spent billions of dollars. And by the end of the Biden administration, I think we had less than 20 chargers that had actually been deployed. And what we've got to understand is that the marketplace and the private sector knows how to meet these needs. And if you try to do it through government command and control, where you've got some politician or bureaucrat in Washington deciding, oh, we need this many chargers or this many gas pumps, that's not how you grow an economy.
Okay, let's hear from Martin in Long Island, New York, on a line for Republicans. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, C-SPAN and Mr. Reed. I have a question. I'm 79 years old, and my parents always taught me it's so easy to criticize someone or something without having a solution. And I watch the Democratic Party always criticizing the Republicans, and they're always criticizing our president with no solutions. My question to you, Mr. Reed, where is our nationalism in this country? Why can't we work together so when our foreign governors see what's going on, how we're fighting in America, they take advantage of us? Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Well, thanks for the question, and congratulations on reaching the age of 79. And I would just say, I'm as an American historian, which is what I was ironically enough trained to do. I didn't end up doing it, but I got a doctorate in history, and I spent a lot of time thinking about our country, about its history, about its DNA, and about what makes America special. Some would say exceptional. I would certainly agree with that. What makes America great, to borrow a phrase. And I would say one of the things is that, yes, we fight, and we fight in a very robust and energetic way. I think our enemies and adversaries mistake that and misapprehend that for disunity. It is not. It is us as Americans exercising our precious First Amendment rights of free speech, of freedom of association, and in some cases, freedom of religion, okay? And that creates this Sturm und Drang and this constant, dichotomy in our country. But no one should mistake that for the fact that we are, as a nation, are not the United States of America. If you hit this country, if you harm even a hair on the head of a single American, either our service personnel or a citizen, this country will come together. And, as Winston Churchill said, America is a slumbering giant, but once awakened, it is a roaring lion. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we have our fights and we have our disagreements. And I would say this about President Trump's policies. You talked about all the criticism. We got a report this week that real wages for hourly workers in the United States have gone up 2% in real terms. That means after inflation, just in the first 5 months of the Trump administration, that is the largest such increase ever recorded in that short a period of time in a presidential administration in recorded economic history. Okay? We got an inflation report this week. And in spite of all of the warnings, and all the doomsday predictions that tariffs were going to increase inflation, inflation is falling and is either at or near the Fed's 2% target, and that's just in the first 5 months.
So I do want to get to a couple more folks.
Yesterday, the S&P hit an all-time high. So these policies are already working, and once we pass the Trump tax cuts, which we're going to do, and we make them permanent, between the tariff and trade policies, the deregulation, the tax cuts, and then once the Fed belatedly finally gets the signal that inflation is under control, real wages are rising, they'll cut interest rates, and this economy is going to explode.
So Rashad is in Sacramento, California, on our line for Independence. Go ahead, Rashad.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I'm not familiar with your guest and his organization, but I do applaud what he's doing as far as the school voucher choice. I'm a parent and educator, and I definitely see a lot of what's happening with regard to the systemic problems that go on in a lot of the public schools. And there needs to be more advocacy for school choice because my children, when they were coming up, I got involved with the schools to try to look at why are they struggling so much. And the reason why I got into education was a result of that. My daughter, my oldest daughter, just graduated from the University of California this spring, and she was first in private school. Then we put her in a public school, which she didn't like. But I wanted her to have that experience because, like your guest, I came through the public school education from all the way up to college. And everything too. And
so, Rashad, we only have a few minutes left in this segment. Can you ask your question?
Oh, sure. So, what is this organization doing to advocate for more parents, particularly in urban areas, regarding school choice? What are they doing to get the word? Because
okay, let's let him answer that.
Yeah, great question, and it is a top legislative and policy objective and priority for our organization. And I mentioned earlier, we have full-time lobbyists already in about 16 state capitals and state legislatures. We're on our way to expanding that into 20 to 25 states and ultimately 30 plus states over the next several years. And those advocates in those capitals, and more importantly, the churches and the citizens that they're representing and advocating on behalf of are working at the state level to expand these school choice programs. And this is going to be just like what unfolded in Florida, what has unfolded in Texas, and other states that have moved ahead on school choice. It's going to be gradual. You're not going to go from no school choice to universal school choice in one legislative session. So it's going to happen incrementally. We believe that we will ultimately achieve the objective of having tax credits for contributions to those programs at the federal level, and we're not going to rest on this.
Matt is in St. Louis, Missouri, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Matt.
Hi, thank you. I want to show that the pro-life side is hypocritical. I'll do that by pointing out that what they want is to use the government to create laws to force women to sacrifice their bodies for someone else. and no one wants their body sacrificed for someone else. This gentleman on the TV screen would never want the government to force him to sacrifice a kidney for someone else. And pregnancy is hard on a woman's body. It's irreversible. And so the argument I often hear is they didn't want to be pregnant, they shouldn't have had sex, as if consent for sex is consent for pregnancy. It is not. Consent for sex is just that, nothing more. If the rule is consent for sex, the act, means consent for pregnancy, the risk, then consent for leaving your door unlocked is consent for home invasion. Since it's clearly
So, Matt,
not.
what issue are you asking Ralph Reed to respond to?
I want him to recognize that he's being a hypocrite when he says he is pro-life, because he would never sacrifice his kidney for someone who needs it today, right now.
Okay, let's let Mr. Reed respond.
Yeah, I mean, I as I said earlier, we understand that when it comes to the issue of protecting life, that you're balancing two competing rights. One is the right of the woman to make her own choices. The other is the right of the unborn child to have a right to life. And if you want to live in a society where life is devalued, where life is not protected, and you think you can only have that policy with regard to unborn children and think it isn't going to affect the elderly, it isn't going to affect the infirm, that it isn't going to lead to a devaluing of all life, I think we're kidding ourselves. So we believe that the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence guarantees every one of our citizens a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We believe the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Law provision or clause says that no person, doesn't say whether they're born or unborn, shall be denied a right to life without due process of law. And we believe the unborn child is a person. They have brain waves at roughly 30 days. They have a heartbeat within 5 to 6 weeks. They are alive, and they feel pain at a certain point. So we, again, this is a matter of prudential judgment. It's primarily proceeding at the state level, but we certainly don't believe at the national level that a child that can feel pain, that a child that can survive outside the womb, and we would argue a child that has a heartbeat and is clearly alive should be denied that right to life. And by the way, half of those unborn children are women. So we're standing up for the right of these women. They just happen to be in the womb, and they have a right to life too, so that they get to pursue their choices after they're born.
David is in Los Angeles, California, on our line for Independence. Good morning, David.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to comment on the gentleman's statement about renewable energy. I heard his ridiculous talking points. Renewable energy is reshaping the world in a profound and necessary way. You're harnessing these sources like solar, wind, hydro,
David, I want you to finish
geothermal.
your point, but which point that Ralph Reed made did you think was ridiculous?
Well, in specifically, he talked about charging stations, and it mentioned the infrastructure bill. But, he failed to mention things like it was complemented by the Inflation Reduction Act. There was a 30% tax credit, and we have charging stations all over the place, particularly here in Los Angeles. There are charging stations everywhere you go. Half the parking lot is charging stations. Now everybody's utilizing these EV chargers, and they've grown significantly, and it has made a major impact on the renewable energy. And then he said something ridiculous about how global warming is only going to change, as if we shouldn't try to make a difference. And global warming's impact on the environment is significant, and it's going to be catastrophic if we don't continue to pursue renewable energy in an aggressive way. And, he just made it seem like it's a trivial attempt. Just because something's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt to try to achieve it. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay. Mr. Reed, we'll let you respond and before we wrap up.
Well, again, I don't think he really disagreed with anything that I said. I didn't say that there shouldn't be EV chargers. I said the opposite. I drive an electric vehicle. I use electric chargers, and trust me, if I go outside of suburban Atlanta where I live, Atlanta proper, it's very hard to find a charging station. So I'm all for more chargers. What I'm not for is some government boondoggle where we create some bureaucratic program. People apply for government contracts. It takes years and years to decide who's going to get the money. Then it takes them even more years to decide who's going to build the chargers and where they're going to put them. So by the end of the Biden administration, they made all these great promises. My point was not that we shouldn't have alternative sources of energy. My point was the marketplace and not government command and control should decide that. So that's why I'm in favor of treating all of these forms of energy equally. Let them all be treated the same under government policy, and let's have an all of the above strategy. I'm not opposed to solar or wind. I'm not opposed to electric vehicles. I just don't believe the government should pick winners and losers because it doesn't work and because most of the time none of this stuff ends up being deployed. And you remember the Solyndra debacle under the Obama administration where they gave government loans and tax credits in the billions to startup companies that were supposed to provide all these solar energy, and they went under and the taxpayers lost. So that was my only point, not that we shouldn't have it, but that the government shouldn't be trying to dictate it. The government did not dictate the rise of the fossil fuel industry. That happened in the marketplace. The gas stations that you see when you fuel your car, those are not government gas stations. That was the private sector. That works, that meets the needs of consumers. The other usually leads to failure and to a massive loss of taxpayer funds.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Ralph Reed is the founder and co-chair of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, in town for this year's Road to Majority Conference. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Kimberly. Great to